yes men. They don't want to rub you the wrong way. But see, I was brought up with a guy where I was walking on eggshells my whole life because my dad had this neuro disease, this multiple sclerosis disease of the central nervous system. So he was always edgy. And so I could see you got an issue. You might have undiagnosed multiple sclerosis. But you know, somebody, your son, somebody's got to put you down, man, and say, hey, call you out. Say, yeah, I'm willing. Your dad, you want to kill me, you know, like I went through with my dad and how to it. But you know, I'm going to tell you for your own good that this is not good. You know what you're saying here, what you're thinking here, and this personality trait has got to go because it just makes other men want to. You know, you get intimidating to them, they want to get equally intimidating to you. Do you understand what you know the kind of spirits you're conjuring up by getting condemning and ad hominem attacks on people? You got to watch your p's and q's. You got to watch your step. You got to read every day, twice a day, 3 times a day, the book of James, chapter 3. I'm just saying, man, for your own good. You know, do fresh and bitter water come from the same stream? Just remember these things. Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. A man that can tame the tongue is perfect. All that kind of stuff. Oh, you know, last week I was talking about being on Fiddler's Green with my dad. We had to go to take the boat, motor it up to Sausalito from Santa Cruz to have it outrigged because there wasn't a crane that was big enough at the Santa Cruz Harbor. It had a very tall mast, probably close to 50-foot mast on this boat. And we had to go to Sausalito where there was a crane large enough to put it up. But that's where we were when it was outfitted and we were going under the Golden Gate Bridge. But and you know the party he had on board, his friends from Santa Cruz and whatnot. He was politically connected. Actually, my dad was rubbing elbows with guys like Leon Panetta, believe it or not. But yeah, he knew him from some other people. But you know, he on this boat, so we get hit by this swell broadside while he's turning around. It's the middle of the night. They're under the Golden Gate Bridge. Everybody's drunk. And the boat almost capsized, which is hard to do for a trimaran. You know, you got one big hull and then two smaller ones, and one on each side. Very stable configuration. No ballast, no keel needed to drag you down to the bottom. But you know what happened was it was so severe that my room was on the left side, which would be the port side, I believe, is the left side of the boat, toward the back end of the boat, the stern area. But my cabin, it broke two of the frames in there. So this was serious stuff. And I got off the boat for a short period. I was done with my dad, and he made me stay. My choice was to go stay with his girlfriend in Santa Cruz, who was part of this political insider group that these people that you know hobnob that knew the top Democrats, I guess, like Leon Panetta. But anyhow, it was serious. So I was pissed off, and I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I was supposed to be in ninth grade at this point, but I didn't know. I was kicking around, and you know, for a period of short, maybe 2 weeks. But what ended up happening, I didn't want to go to Connecticut to stay with my mom and sisters. That would have been one option. Though they had a small apartment, I would have had to sleep in the living room, like I ended up doing later. But my dad came up from. He had the boat down. He got it down to Puerto Vallarta, and he came up and he took me and this guy Bob Jones. Bob was a teenage. He was a high school dropout. My dad knew him. He helped build the boat. Actually, my dad conscripted him to help him build the boat, and Bob got to live on the boat in the meantime. 16 years old, Bob was helping build the boat. I was a couple of years younger than Bob. So he came up and he got Bob and I and took us on a bus to Mexico. He said, "This is what I want to do. I'm just, well, you know, if you guys are willing and wanting to do this." So he came up and did that. On the bus ride down, it was funny because we stop at all these towns in Mexico, and every time we did, Bob would go buy some tequila and lemon or lime, whatever it was, and you know he treated me to imbibe with him. And we're on this bus, and I remember Bob always wore this beanie, and I at one point was drunk, 14-year-old drunk kid, grabbed his beanie, and I put my head out the window of the bus, and the beanie blew off, and I And Bob turned around, "Where's my beanie?" I blamed these Mexican guys sitting in the back. That was the last thing I remembered before I woke up. My dad was pulling me off the bus. It had to be 80, 90, 100 degrees, just humid as hell. I had peed in my pants. I had barfed on myself. And my dad was yanking me off the bus by the short hairs of my neck. And so we stayed in Puerto Vallarta for a while, and it was awful. I drank the water out of a tap, thinking it was just a myth that, don't trust the water, and ended up getting very sick. Moctezuma's revenge, dysentery, barfing, and diarrhea at the same time. It's bad, man. I'm not sure I ever got over that completely. That's where he met. I didn't get to meet what is his name, Peter Fonda. He met Peter Fonda, was down there on his sailboat. Remember, we're talking about 1972, 73, probably early 73, about that time. But he said he was a real arrogant a-hole, didn't like him. I can imagine that the personalities would have clashed. My dad had an extremely strong personality, but just a little interesting tidbit. But I got down on the boat. I sailed as far as Costa Rica, and on the way, we stopped at, I remember, Zihuatanejo. If you look up, you want to go on an exotic vacation in Mexico, man, Zihuatanejo. There was 25 foot wide, I'm not kidding you, manta rays. I mean, these things do get that big. Manta rays, just under the ocean, you could see them. I mean, the water is perfectly clear all the way down to the white sand bottom. Awesome place. I mean, of all the places I went in Europe, even like in Spain, some really exotic places, like Puerto de Solier. I loved it as a kid. But this is as good as it gets in Zihuatanejo, Mexico. But I got to see the cliff divers in Acapulco, and I sailed all the way down. We stopped, I remember, Guatemala and El Salvador, never Nicaragua, but these were stop-off points. And then Costa Rica. But that's where my dad and I started really bumping heads. I was going through puberty, all that stuff. So I was probably not very easy to get along with. And I remember one time my dad told me to do something up on the deck of the boat. We were mooring it, pulling it into the pier to a mooring or something, and parking the boat, essentially. And he told me to do something. I wasn't doing it fast enough, and he got pissed off, and he's let go of the wheel, and he came up on the deck where I was fiddling with the ropes and kicked me in the behind so hard that I lifted off the deck of the boat. And that was it, man. I just stormed off to my cabin, just started cussing at him, F you, and this and that. And so shortly thereafter, took me on a train to the capital of Costa Rica, San Jose, and I took a flight from there to wound up in Norwich, Connecticut eventually. Staying with my mom and sisters, I kicking around, still not going to school, and I just took a job on a dairy farm for $1 an hour, 10 hours a day. Saved up my money, and my sisters and I probably kept bugging my mom to move back to Santa Cruz, so we finally did. I wasn't there, but maybe 6 months or something. I forget how long exactly, but I like Norwich, actually. I really do like Norwich, Connecticut. But I don't know what it's like today, but I liked it back then. I liked the vibe. I liked the people. I liked the place. I don't know. It's hard to explain why you like certain places. But as a child, I got to live in Sarasota, Florida, and we were right on the coast, the Gulf of Mexico there. I mean, dolphins in the front yard at 5 years old, and it was perfect. 50 palm trees in our yard, literally 50. I counted them, palm trees in our yard. But, God, you got to imagine a kid loved that. But anyhow, we come back to Santa Cruz, and my mom rented a place. My sisters shortly thereafter got emancipated, started working and supporting themselves. You could afford an apartment back then, on any job at all. So my mom and I rented a place, and shortly thereafter I was emancipated. My dad came, he helped. He had, I guess he had like pretty much an all-girl crew coming back. He was coming back up north, and he crashed the boat on the rocks in Mexico, Fiddler's Green. And it destroyed the boat. He somehow bought this 54 Chevy pickup, and he tried to salvage some of the rigging and stuff from the boat. Quite a story. He talks about it in this book, this Cruising to Nirvana on Dreams. But it was interesting stuff. And he came back. One of the things he salvaged was a surfboard. So when he got back up, I guess I was about 15, and he gave me this 7-foot 4-inch Natural Progressions brand surfboard. And I took up surfing. With the money I earned from working on the farm in Connecticut, I bought a little dirt bike. It was an XR75, I remember. And I started going to school, Santa Cruz High, and living with my mom, and then it was a pretty good time. I mean, I always seemed to make the best of things, no matter what my situation was. But it was a very highlight of my life was learning surfing, and sold my motorcycle to buy a wetsuit, and I started doing dishes and stuff like that, working at different restaurants on the wharf in Santa Cruz. Carnelia Brothers I worked at, and Stagnero's I worked at. I worked at Mission Linen. That was part of how I earned my car, is working the summer there. Industrial laundromat, a horrible job. Supposed to be union, but my fat boss sat on a stack of laundry smoking a cigar with a stopwatch, timing me, loading these giant machines with bar mop, as these greasy towels at restaurants give them to launder, and they're filled with maggots, and it stinks to high heaven. It's gross as can be. There's sheets and stuffed towels from the hospitals with blood and guts, and that was my job as a 15-year-old. And I saved up enough to buy this 65 Mercury Comet. I'd still have that car today if I'd known what I had then. Four on the floor, 289 V8 motor, dual exhaust. Loved that car. Fast. I used to race it. But put my surf racks on there. I thought I was styling. But anyhow, I got emancipated. My dad ended up helping my sisters and I start another health food store in the town of Soquel, Soquel. It's a suburb of Santa Cruz, next to Capitola, another suburb of Santa Cruz in the county there, just south of the town of Santa Cruz, city of Santa Cruz. But we're right downtown, biggest building on the main street there, Aquarian Age Natural Foods, 1975, about the year, let's see, Elvis Presley was still 1970, no, about 1977. Okay, yeah, Elvis Presley was still alive. He died that year, I guess. But, yeah, it was very successful, and we were very diligent about keeping it successful. My sister and I would go in there early in the morning, would make a bunch of avocado and cheese sandwiches with Sprouts, and they were very popular. You know, for $1 a piece, they just sold like hotcakes, and everyone that we could make ended up selling. So it was a nice little, loss leader, brought people in. And no, listen, we were making profit. What am I talking? It wasn't even a loss leader. That's just one of the ways, you bring people into your store. You do something really cheap to get them in there, and then you sell them stuff more expensive. It's different markup percentages on stuff. Like for bulk stuff, it's pretty low, and for produce, it's pretty low. For dairy, it's pretty low. For dry goods, it's medium. But when you get into cosmetics and the supplements, vitamins, it's 100%. So you buy a bottle of vitamins or cosmetics for $5, you sell it for 10. It was like price rigging. Really, it's really anti-capitalistic if you think about it. So it's I don't know. The whole retail industry is nothing like what it should be today. So it's all kind of messed up. But anyhow, that was my life. But 2 years into the business, my sister had an issue with drugs and stuff, and she forced the sale of the store. I'd probably still be doing that store today, running that store today. But story of my life. I don't know how I even got on this, but I did have an interesting childhood, interesting upbringing. But also, one time I was telling my dad I smelled propane on Fiddler's Green, because you got propane tanks, these big propane tanks, you keep them in a compartment. And he thought it was just, well, you're just smelling, it's venting, and you're just smelling. But I opened the compartment where they were kept, and I had an explosion in my face. Scared the crap out of me. It wasn't serious enough to go to the hospital, luckily, but it was just the amount that it escaped and was trapped in that compartment. But we ended up tightening the connections on the tanks, so I might have saved the entire boat from being blown up by getting my eyelashes and eyebrows singed and getting a little red face. We all heard about that story of those people, those poor people in Mexico, trying to save a few pesos of gasoline, ended up killing 6 of them and maiming countless others. Can you imagine? I mean, if they had a basic universal income in Mexico, that wouldn't have happened. An InfoWars reporter was groped violently at a women's march. Mainstream media didn't talk about that, did they? Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr., by the way, was a big proponent of universal basic income. Boy, was he right.